The sun was low in the alien sky, casting long shadows across the market square. Bright colors hung from stalls, and strange smells of food and metal filled the air. Voices of different species mixed together. 1,000 conversations happening at once. Eli, a human soldier in worn armor, walked slowly through the crowd, his eyes scanning everything. He was only here for supplies before returning to base. Nothing more, nothing less. But fate had other plans for him today, as he passed a row of stalls selling fruits that glowed. Faintly in the sun, he felt a small tug on his sleeve. He looked down and saw a tiny alien girl, no older than 8 by human standards. Her skin was pale blue, her large golden eyes wet with tears, and her hands were trembling. Mighty human. She whispered, her voice shaking, "Please, save my sister with me." Eli froze, unsure if he had heard her right. The crowd around them kept moving, but a strange silence seemed to fall between him and the girl. Her name, she told him, was Leary. Her words came in bursts, each one rushed. As if she feared time itself, raiders had taken her sister only hours ago, grabbing her from the edge of the market. They were heading to a place outside the city of Fortress where living beings were sold like cattle. Her people were too afraid to go after them. The raiders carried strange glowing weapons that cut through stone. Eli's orders were to return to his unit before nightfall, but something in her eyes made him hesitate. He crouched down to her level. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Why not your own people?" Leary's lips trembled. "Because you are human," she said, as if that explained everything. Eli didn't know whether to laugh or sigh at that. But her gaze was steady, desperate, and filled with hope. Before he could answer, a few nearby merchants noticed them and whispered to each other. One of them muttered, "She's trouble. Human, walk away." Another shook his head. "The raiders will kill anyone who tries to take back what they've stolen." Eli looked around the market, seeing the way people avoided Leary's eyes. No one would help her, not here, and yet, this little girl had chosen to ask a stranger from another world. The idea of ignoring her made his stomach twist. He had seen too much already, too many people left behind, too many cries unanswered. He remembered the sound of his younger sister's voice back on Earth, and for a moment, Leary's plea became hers. He took a slow breath. His mind already making the decision his orders told him not to. "Show me where," he said at last, his voice firm. Leary's eyes widened, a spark of life returning to them. She grabbed his hand with surprising strength and pulled him toward the edge of the market. The crowd parted for them, some with pity, others with fear. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into deep shades of red and gold. Somewhere beyond the city walls, danger waited. They moved quickly through narrow alleys, stepping over puddles that reflected the strange alien sky. Eli noticed how Leary kept glancing over her shoulder. "Are they following us?" he asked. She nodded slightly. "They always watch. They don't like when someone escapes." Her words made him grip his weapon tighter. Every sound seemed louder, now the scrape of metal doors, the hiss of steam from pipes above. Leary spoke in a whisper, telling him the fortress was guarded. Day and night, her sister would be sold at nightfall to the highest bidder, and that bidder might not be from this world. Eli didn't ask what that meant, he could guess. And the thought made his jaw tighten. They passed through a broken archway that led to a quieter street. Here, the buildings leaned over them like giants, their walls marked with strange symbols. Leary slowed down for a moment, as if catching her breath. "Why do you call me mighty human?" Eli asked suddenly. She looked up at him, her voice steady, despite the fear in her face. "Because humans fight for others," she said, "even when it's not their war." Her words stayed with him, heavier than the armor on his shoulders. At the far end of the street, the city wall rose high, covered in cables and glowing signs. Beyond it, the land stretched into rocky hills under the fading light. That way, Leary pointed, her small hand shaking. Eli knew that once they crossed the wall, there would be no turning back. He checked the power level on his weapon, adjusted the strap on his armor. Then he looked down at her. "You stay close to me," he said, "no matter what happens." She nodded without hesitation, her eyes full of trust. As they reached the old maintenance gate in the wall, a deep voice called from behind them. Two raiders stood there, their armor dull but their weapons bright with energy. Eli felt Leary's grip tighten on his hand. One of the raiders sneered, "Going somewhere? Human." Eli didn't answer. He was already moving, already preparing. The first strike would decide whether they lived or died. And in that moment, Eli knew he wasn't just helping a child. He was about to start a fight that could burn this whole city to the ground. The two raiders moved closer, their weapons glowing faintly in the dim light. Eli kept his body between them and Leary, his hand resting on the grip of his own weapon. The air was tense, the kind of stillness that came right before a fight. One of the raiders grinned, showing teeth sharpened into points. "You should walk away, human," he growled. "This isn't your problem." Eli didn't reply. His eyes locked on the man's weapon hand. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and struck. His weapon fired once, a quick flash of blue light. The first raider dropped before he could even pull the trigger. The second hesitated just long enough for Eli to close the distance and knock him out cold with a hard blow. Leary stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "You? You're really coming," she whispered, as if she still couldn't believe it. Eli didn't answer. He just motioned for her to move. They stepped over the fallen raiders and slipped through the old maintenance gate. The city fell away behind them, replaced by open land that stretched toward jagged hills. The wind here was sharp and carried the scent of dust and stone. The light was fading fast, and the shadows grew longer. Eli knew that if the fortress was as heavily guarded as Leary claimed, they needed to arrive before full dark. They followed a narrow trail between rocky cliffs. Leary moved quickly, clearly knowing the way. Her small steps were fast but silent. Like someone used to hiding, every so often she would stop and listen, her head tilting slightly. "Are they tracking us?" Eli asked, his voice low. She nodded. "They have hunters. They can smell fear." Eli gave a faint smile. "Then it's good, I'm not afraid." She looked up at him and, for the first time, smiled back. Though it was small and fleeting, the path became steeper, forcing them to climb over loose stones. Eli kept scanning the ridges above them, in the fading light. He caught glimpses of movement shadows that seemed to follow but never approach. He didn't tell Leary what he saw. No need to make her more afraid. The wind picked up, carrying faint echoes of mechanical sounds. "Almost there," Leary said, pointing to a distant glow in the hills. It was faint, but Eli could see it light, spilling from high walls into the night. "That's the fortress?" he asked. She nodded. "They call it the Black Spire." The name fit. As they drew closer, Eli could make out tall, jagged towers that rose like knives against the sky. The walls were dark metal, patched and welded over decades. Lights moved along the top. Patrols, armed and alert, Eli studied the ground around the fortress, cuting the gates, the guard rotations, and the possible weak points. "There's no way through the front," he murmured, mostly to himself. Leary pointed toward a shadowed slope on the far side. "There's a tunnel," she said. "It smells bad, but it's empty." Mostly, Eli asked, raising an eyebrow. She didn't meet his eyes. "Sometimes there are things in there." "Things that crawl," Eli exhaled slowly. "All right, lead the way." They circled wide, keeping low to avoid the patrols. More than once, Eli had to pull Leary down into the dirt as searchlights swept over the rocks. Once, They lay still for nearly a full minute while two guards passed within meters of them. Their voices deep and strange. Eli's heart pounded. But his grip on his weapon was steady. Finally, they reached the slope, a jagged cut in the hill that led to a dark opening. The tunnel mouth yawned before them, black and silent. A foul, damp smell drifted out. Carrying the scent of rust and something rotten, Leary hesitated at the entrance, her small hand gripping Eli's armor. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Switching on the dim light attached to his weapon, its beam cut through the darkness, revealing stone walls slick with moisture. As they moved deeper inside, the sounds of the outside world faded away, replaced by the slow drip of water and the soft scrape of their footsteps. Twice, Eli saw small, many-legged creatures skitter across the floor and vanish into cracks. Leary stayed close enough that he could feel her trembling halfway through. They came to a section where the tunnel narrowed. Eli squeezed through first, then reached back to help her. That was when they heard a low growl from somewhere ahead. The sound was deep, guttural, and too close. Eli raised his weapon, the beam of light cutting forward. A pair of eyes glinted in the dark, low to the ground but moving toward them. The creature stepped into the light, a twisted thing with long limbs and a mouth full of teeth. It hissed and lunged. Eli fired twice, the tunnel flashing bright blue. The creature crumpled to the ground, unmoving. Leary gasped, but kept moving when he told her to. They stepped over the creature and pressed on, at last. They saw a faint light ahead, the other end of the tunnel. As they emerged, the stench of the tunnel gave way to the dry, cold air of the hills. From here, the fortress loomed only a short. "Climb away," Leary pointed to a small, grated opening at the base of the wall. "That's how we get in," she whispered. Eli crouched to study it, his mind already forming a plan, if they were lucky. This would take them straight inside without alerting the guards if they were unlucky. Well, he'd find out soon enough. The grated opening was just big enough for a human to crawl through. Eli ran his fingers over the metal. Feeling the cold bite of rust, it had been there for years, maybe decades, but the bolts were loose. He pulled out his knife and worked them free, the sound of metal scraping on metal loud in the silence. Leary kept watch, her golden eyes darting toward the guard towers above. The searchlights swept across the outer hills, but never dipped low enough to catch them. Finally, the grate came free with a soft groan. Eli slid it aside and peered into the darkness beyond. The space inside was a narrow crawl tunnel. It smelled of dust, oil, and something faintly metallic. Blood. Maybe. He went first, his weapon strapped to his back so he could move on his elbows. Leary followed close, her breath short and quick. The walls were so tight they scraped against his armor. Somewhere above, faint footsteps, echo guards patrolling the main floors. Eli knew that if they were discovered here, there would be no escape. After several minutes, the tunnel opened into a dimly lit maintenance corridor. The air was warmer here, the hum of machines vibrating through the floor. Pipes ran along the walls dripping with condensation. The smell of grease and ozone was heavy. They moved silently, following the faint sound of voices. The corridor ended at a grated platform that overlooked a large central chamber. Eli crouched low and looked through. Below them, dozens of cages lined the walls. Inside were beings from half a dozen worlds, some sitting in silence, others whispering in strange tongues. Guards moved between the cages, checking locks and delivering small bowls of murky liquid. Leary's small hand clutched his arm. Her eyes locked on a cage in the center of the room. There, chained to a raised platform, was a young alien girl, her sister, even from this distance. Eli could see the glowing collar around her neck. She was thin, her skin dull from exhaustion. Her head bowed, Leary's breath caught, a tiny sound escaping her lips. Eli put a finger to his own mouth, signaling her to be silent. Near the platform stood a massive figure in beetle-like armor. His shoulders were broad, his head covered in a helmet with sharp ridges in one clawed hand. He held a long blade that seemed to hum faintly the way the other guards moved around. Him made it clear this was the leader. He barked orders in a harsh, guttural voice. 2 guards dragged another captive away toward a side door. Eli guessed that was where the sales took place. Time was running out. He scanned the chamber. Looking for a path down, a narrow maintenance ladder ran along the far wall, mostly hidden behind pipes. It led to a shadowed area near the cages. Eli pointed to it, and Leary nodded quickly. They moved back into the corridor, keeping low. Every sound seemed to loud the creak of metal underfoot, the hiss of steam from a nearby vent, twice. Eli had to stop as a guard passed close enough to touch. Finally, they reached the ladder. Eli climbed first, his movements slow and deliberate. The rungs were slick, forcing him to grip harder. At the bottom, he crouched behind a stack of metal crates. Leary joined him, her eyes fixed on her sister. They were close now, less than 10 meters away. Eli whispered, "Stay here until I signal." She shook her head fiercely. "No, I'm coming." He wanted to argue, but there was no time. The leader had begun walking toward the platform, his blade in hand. He stopped beside Leary's sister and gripped the chain. Lifting her head roughly, her eyes met his for a moment before she looked away in defiance. He laughed, a sound that echoed. Like grinding stone, Eli's hand tightened around his weapon. He needed a distraction, something to pull the guard's attention away. His eyes darted around the chamber until they landed on a hanging fuel lantern near the crates. He aimed and fired, the shot shattering it instantly. Flames burst upward as fuel splashed across the floor. Guards shouted, some running to put out the leader snarled and turned toward the noise. Eli took the chance and moved, sprinting across the open space. 2 guards spotted him and raised their weapons. Eli dove low, firing twice in quick succession. One went down, the other stumbled back. Dropping his weapon, Leary dashed forward from her hiding place. Skidding to a stop beside the platform, she grabbed her sister's hands, whispering her name. The girl's eyes widened, tears forming instantly. Eli reached the collar and examined the locking mechanism. It was electronic, pulsing with faint light. He spotted a control device clipped to the leader's belt. Of course, the leader saw him then, roaring and charging forward. Eli barely had time to push Leary and her sister aside before the massive blade slammed into the ground where they had been. The floor cracked, sending dust and shards of stone into the air. The leader pulled the blade free and swung again. Eli blocked with his weapon, the impact jolting through his arms. Around them, the chamber was chaos flames, shouts, and the clanging of metal. If he could just get that control device. He ducked under a wide swing and grabbed at the leader's belt. The alien backhanded him hard, sending him sprawling into a cage. Pain flared in his ribs, but he rolled to his feet. The leader advanced, blade raised high. Eli's hand shot forward, grabbing the control device and ripping it free. Before the alien could react, Eli smashed it against the floor. The glowing collar around Leary's sister sparked once, then shattered. Chains fell away with a heavy clang. Leary caught her sister as she stumbled forward, but the alarm began to serve. Blare red lights flooding the chamber. More guards poured in from every doorway. Eli raised his weapon again, backing toward the ladder. This rescue was far from over. The alarm screamed through the fortress, a piercing sound that made the metal walls shake. Red lights flashed in every corner, bathing the cages, the guards, and even the smoke-filled air in an eerie glow. Eli stood with his weapon raised. Leary clutching her sister behind him, the leader, towering and armored, gripped his heavy blade and stepped forward. his beetle-like armor glinting in the emergency lights. "Human," he growled, his voice like stone grinding against stone. "You will not leave alive." Eli didn't answer. He had no time for words now. The first wave of guards charged, their weapons firing bursts of green energy. Eli moved fast, diving to the side and firing back in controlled bursts. 2 guards went down, another stumbled, but more were coming. The leader swung his blade in a wide arc, the steel hissing through the air. Eli ducked under it. Feeling the wind of the strike pass over his head, the blade slammed into the floor, cracking it like thin ice. Eli took the chance and fired point-blank into the leader's chest. The armor absorbed most of the blast, but it still staggered him. "Run!" Eli shouted to Leary and her sister, pointing toward the maintenance ladder. But before they could move, 2 guards blocked their path. Weapons raised, Leary's sister stumbled. Still weak from the collar's effects, Eli gritted his teeth and charged, slamming into the guards before they could fire. They hit the ground hard, weapons clattering away. Eli grabbed one of the dropped blades and spun it in his hands. It was heavier than he liked, but it would do. The leader roared and came at him again. This time, Eli met the strike with the stolen blade. The clash sent sparks flying, the sound ringing through the chamber around them. Other captives in the cages pressed forward, shouting and banging on the bars. The chaos was growing. The fortress was becoming a storm of noise and fire. Eli parried another swing, then kicked the leader in the chest, forcing him back a step, but the alien barely flinched. His strength almost unnatural. Leary's voice cut through the noise. "Eli, behind you." He spun, just as a guard lunged from the side. Eli swung the blade in a low arc. Knocking the guard's legs out from under him, he fired a quick shot to finish the job, then turned back to the leader. The alien's armor was scorched now, but his eyes burned with fury. He stepped forward slowly, like a predator closing in. Eli's breathing was hard, sweat stinging his eyes. He knew he couldn't keep this up for ever too many enemies. Too little time, then he saw it. Just above the leader's head, a fuel pipe running along the ceiling. If he could rupture it, the flames already burning in the room would spread. Fast, he waited for the next strike, sidestepped, and swung his stolen blade upward. The metal screamed as the pipe split open, spraying liquid fuel into the air. Flames leaped higher as the fuel caught, filling the chamber with heat and smoke. Guards shouted in panic, some fleeing toward the exits. The leader roared in anger, slashing wildly through the smoke. Eli ducked low, grabbed Leary and her sister, and pulled them toward the ladder. A blast of heat washed over them as part of the ceiling collapsed. They climbed fast, coughing from the smoke. Below, the leader's voice echoed through the chaos. Promising death, Eli didn't look back. He just kept climbing. They reached the maintenance corridor above. The air cooler but still thick with smoke. Eli pulled the grate shut behind them, hoping it would slow pursuit, but heavy footsteps soon followed. The leader was coming. They ran through the corridor, boots pounding on the metal floor. Ahead, the passage split in two. Leary pointed to the left. "That way leads outside." Eli took it without hesitation, pushing them forward. They burst into a storage bay filled with crates and hanging chains. The sound of engines rumbled nearby vehicle bays. Maybe Eli scanned for an exit, but before he could move, the leader stepped into the bay. Smoke curled around his armor, the glow of the fires behind him casting a monstrous shadow on the wall. His blade dragged across the floor, leaving sparks in its wake. "You fight well, human," he said, his tone almost admiring, "but you will still die here." Eli raised his weapon, his body tense. "I've heard that before," he said, his voice steady. The leader charged, the floor shaking under his weight. Eli dodged to the side, firing as he moved. shots sparking against the alien's armor. The leader swung again, the blade grazing Eli's shoulder and sending pain shooting down his arm. But Eli didn't slow. He grabbed a hanging chain, swung it hard, and wrapped it around the leader's arm. The alien snarled and tried to pull free, but Eli yanked the chain with all his strength, pulling the blade down into the floor. Now? Eli shouted to Leary. She grabbed a loose fuel canister from a nearby crate and rolled it toward the leader's feet. Eli fired at it, the explosion knocking the massive alien back in a cloud of fire and smoke, without waiting to see if he would rise. Eli pulled the sisters toward the far exit. They ran through the smoke-filled bay, the sound of alarms and shouts fading behind them. But deep down, Eli knew this wasn't over. The leader wasn't dead, not yet. The storage bay doors slammed open with a burst of cold night air. Eli pushed Leary and her sister through first, the heavy smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes. Outside, the fortress loomed behind them like a dark beast breathing fire, its towers glowing in the red light of alarms. The sound of shouts and boots echoed from inside the raiders. We're already giving chase. Eli glanced over his shoulder, scanning the shadows for the leader. He couldn't see him, but that didn't mean he was gone. Which way? Eli asked sharply, his eyes on the rocky hills beyond. Leary pointed toward a narrow path that wound between jagged boulders. That leads to the old canyon, she said quickly. If we get there, they can't follow us with their big machines. Good enough, Eli muttered. Pulling them into a run, the ground was uneven, forcing them to watch every step behind them. The sound of engines roared to life, smaller pursuit vehicles this time, fast enough to close the gap. Eli spotted the glow of headlights bouncing off the rocks. He pushed the sisters forward, his mind racing for options. A sudden burst of green energy fire lit up the night, striking the rocks near their feet. Keep moving, he shouted, grabbing Leary's sister and pulling her along. They reached a narrow choke point where the path tightened to barely a meter wide. Eli dropped to one knee, firing back down the trail. One of the vehicles swerved and crashed against the rocks, flames bursting from its side. The others slowed, their riders taking cover and returning fire. The canyon was close, but they weren't going to make it without slowing the pursuit. Eli spotted a loose boulder high on the slope, balanced dangerously above the path. Stay here, he told the sisters. He scrambled up the rocks, the sharp edges cutting into his hands. Blaster fire sparked against the stone around him, but he kept climbing. Reaching the boulder, he braced his legs and shoved with all his strength. With a grinding roar, the rock began to roll. It tumbled down the slope, smashing into the lead vehicle and sending it spinning into the one behind it. Metal screamed, and the narrow pass was blocked by wreckage. Go, Eli called, dropping back down beside them. They ran again, the path finally opening into the mouth of the canyon. The air here was cooler, the sound of the pursuit muffled by the high stone walls. Leary gasped for breath, but didn't slow, her sister clinging to her arm. Eli's eyes kept scanning the cliffs above perfect ground for an ambush. The canyon floor twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing so much they had to walk single file. Shadows clung to the edges, and every echo made it hard to tell where the enemy might be. Halfway through, Eli spotted movement ahead. He stopped instantly, raising his weapon. A small group of raiders stepped into view, blocking the path. They carried spears tipped with glowing blades, their eyes fixed on the human and his companions. One of them grinned. You've caused quite a mess, human. Eli didn't answer. He fired first, dropping the speaker before he could take another step. The canyon exploded into chaos as the others charged. Eli moved like a machine, firing and striking with quick, brutal efficiency. Leary even threw a rock at one raider's head, knocking him off balance long enough for Eli to finish him. When the last one fell, the canyon was silent, except for their breathing. Eli looked at the sisters. You both all right? They nodded, though Leary's sister leaned heavily on her. We're close, Leary said softly. Once we reach the old watch post, we can hide there until morning. They kept moving, the ground sloping upward now. A faint light began to glow ahead, moonlight spilling into the canyon from an open plateau. Eli felt a flicker of relief, but it didn't last long. A deep, familiar roar rolled through the canyon behind them. Eli froze, his gut tightening. The leader stepped into view far down the path. Illuminated by the glow of burning wreckage from the blocked pass, his armor was scorched, his helmet dented. But his massive blade was still in his hands. Even at this distance, Eli could feel the rage radiating from him. He's still coming, Leary whispered, her voice trembling. Eli tightened his grip on his weapon. Then we don't stop until we're out of here, he said firmly. They broke into a run, the plateau drawing closer with every step. The leader's heavy footsteps echoed behind them, growing louder. Just as they reached the open space at the canyon's end, a vehicle roared into view from the side, blocking their path. Eli's heart sank. The raiders had outflanked them. The leader's voice bellowed through the canyon. You cannot escape me, human. Eli's mind raced, searching for an option. Then he saw a narrow ledge on the canyon wall, barely wide enough for one person at a time. It led toward the cliffs above, where they might find a way to lose their pursuers. He pointed. That way go. Leary hesitated only for a second before pulling her sister toward the ledge. Eli stayed behind, firing at the raiders near the vehicle to keep them back. Shots sizzled past his head, striking the stone around him. He backed toward the ledge, following the sisters up. The rock crumbled under his boots, the drop below steep enough to break bones. The leader reached the base of the ledge and began climbing after them. His speed was terrifying for someone his size. By the time they reached the top, Eli's arms burned from the climb. They stumbled onto a flat stretch of rock high above the canyon. The cold night wind whipped against their faces. Far below, the fortress was a red glow in the dark. Eli turned to look back only to see the leader pulling himself up over the edge. The fight wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The leader hauled himself over the edge of the cliff. His massive frame blocked the moonlight, casting a shadow that stretched toward Eli and the sisters. His armor was scorched and cracked, steam rising from dents where blaster shots had hit. But his eyes glowed with a fury that no wound could dim. In his hands, the giant blade hummed with a low, menacing vibration. Eli pushed Leary and her sister behind a large rock. Stay down, he ordered, his voice firm but calm. The wind howled around them, carrying the scent of smoke from the fortress far below. There was no place to run now, no path to sneak around. It was just him and the alien leader, and only one of them would leave this cliff alive. The leader stepped forward slowly, his boots grinding against the stone. You've cost me my prize, human, he said in a voice like rolling thunder. You've shamed my clan, and for that I will tear you apart. Eli's grip tightened on his weapon, his eyes never leaving the aliens. You'll have to catch me first, he replied, his tone steady. Then the leader charged, the ground shaking with each step. Eli rolled to the side just as the massive blade came down. It struck the stone with a deafening crack. Sending shards flying, Eli fired twice into the alien's side. But the armor took the hits. The leader swung again, forcing Eli back toward the cliff's edge. Eli ducked low and slashed at the alien's leg with his combat knife. The blade bit into a weak spot, and the alien snarled in pain, kicking out. Eli was thrown backward, landing hard on the rocky ground. The sisters gasped from their hiding place. Leary's voice carried on the wind. Get up, Eli. He forced himself to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. The leader came in again. Faster now, despite the injury. Their blades clashed in a storm of sparks, each strike ringing like a hammer on steel. Eli blocked one blow, ducked under another, and drove his shoulder into the alien's chest. The impact barely moved him, but it gave Eli enough room to retreat a step. He needed a plan pure strength wouldn't win this fight. Eli's eyes flicked to the cliff edge, where jagged rocks jutted out below if he could get the leader close enough. The alien swung high, aiming for a killing blow. Eli sidestepped, the blade slamming into the stone where he had been. The force cracked the ground, small stones tumbling over the edge. Is that all, human? The leader mocked, his voice dripping. With contempt, Eli didn't answer. Instead, he charged straight at the alien. Firing his blaster at point-blank range, the shots struck the armor's weak points, forcing the alien to stumble back. Step by step, Eli drove him toward the cliff. The leader realized too late what was happening. With a roar, he swung wildly, the blade slicing through the air inches from Eli's face. Eli ducked under it and drove his shoulder into the alien's torso. The alien's foot slipped on the loose gravel near the edge. For a heartbeat, his massive frame wavered. Then Eli slammed into him again with all his weight. The leader's eyes widened in rage and shock as he tumbled backward. He swung his blade desperately, catching Eli's arm as he fell. Pain seared through Eli's muscles, but he held his ground. The alien disappeared over the edge, its roar fading until it was swallowed by the canyon below. Eli staggered back, clutching his wounded arm. The wind rushed past his ears, carrying only silence now. The sisters ran to him, Leary's small hands. Grabbing his uninjured arm, "You did it," she breathed, her eyes wide with awe. Her sister leaned against her, tears streaming down her cheeks. Eli managed a tired smile. "We did it." He glanced at the horizon. First light was beginning to touch the alien sky. They had survived the night, but the fortress would not forget. This insult, more raiders would come searching, and they couldn't stay here. Eli looked at the two sisters, both bruised but alive. "You both ready to keep moving?" he asked. Leary nodded fiercely. "As long as you're with us," and so, with the wind at their backs and danger still ahead, they began the long walk toward safety. Eli knew there would be more battles to fight, but for now, he had kept his promise to the child who had tugged on his sleeve in the market, and that was enough. The rising sun painted the alien sky in shades of gold and crimson. Eli walked ahead, scanning the rocky horizon while Leary and her sister followed close behind. The wind was calmer now, carrying the scent of distant grasslands instead of smoke. For the first time since leaving the fortress, the air felt lighter. But Eli knew this was not the end of their journey, only the end of the first fight. They had traveled for hours, following a narrow ridge until the canyon was far behind them. Below, a small valley spread out, dotted with low green plants and streams that shimmered in the morning light. Leary pointed, her voice full of hope. "That's the safe place." The old watchpost, Eli could see it, a structure half hidden in the valley's cliffs. Its metal walls rusted but still standing. It wasn't much, but it would be shelter. And after a night of running, fighting, shelter was everything. When they reached the watchpost, Eli checked every room, his weapon ready. The place was empty except for dust, old crates, and the skeleton of a long-dead transport vehicle. Leary and her sister sat in the corner, too tired to move. Eli found an old storage locker and pulled out a faded blanket. It wasn't warm, but it was enough to wrap around the sisters. Leary's sister leaned her head on his arm, her voice soft. "I didn't think anyone would come for me." Eli knelt so he could look her in the eye. "I didn't either," he admitted, "but your sister made sure I did." Leary smiled faintly, though her eyes still carried the weight of what they'd been through. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of metal shaped like a coin, but etched with strange symbols. "This is for you," she said. Pressing it into his palm, Eli looked at it, the metal warm from her touch. "What is it?" he asked. "It's our family mark," she said quietly. "Now you're part of it." For a moment, Eli didn't know what to say. He had never thought of himself as someone's family out here, light years away from Earth, but now, in the quiet of the old watch post, it felt right. He closed his hand around the mark and nodded. "Then I'll carry it," he said, "always." The day passed slowly, the sisters sleeping while Eli kept watch. He sat at the broken doorway, his eyes scanning the distant hills for movement. The fortress was still out there, its raiders humiliated and angry. But for now, the world was still. He let himself breathe, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. By late afternoon, the sisters were awake again. Leary brought him a cup of water she had found in a cracked container. "It's not much," she said, "but it's something." Eli drank, then looked out at the fading light. "We can't stay here forever," he told them. "There's a settlement to the east," Leary said. "It's small, but they don't take orders from the raiders." Eli thought for a moment, then nodded. "That's where we'll go." That night, they sat together in the quiet. A small fire flickering in the corner. Leary's sister leaned against him again, her breathing slow and steady. "You're different from other humans I've heard about," she murmured sleepily. Eli raised an eyebrow. "Different? How?" "You fight for people you don't know," she said, "even when you don't have to." Eli looked at the flames for a long time before answering. "Sometimes, you have to be the one who shows up, even when no one else will." When dawn came, they packed what little they had and set out toward the east. The journey would be long, but the sisters walked with more strength now. They laughed quietly together, their steps lighter than the day before. Eli stayed close, scanning the horizon but letting himself enjoy the sound of their voices. The coin-shaped family mark was in his pocket, the metal pressing against his leg with every step. It was a reminder not just of what he had done, but of who he had chosen to be as they reached the crest of a hill. The land beyond stretched wide and open. The sun rose behind them, casting their shadows long across the ground. Leary stopped and looked up at him. "Mighty human," she said with a smile, "wherever we go, we'll tell everyone what you did." Eli chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Just tell them you fought too," he said. "Because you did." Leary's eyes sparkled. "We fought together," and as they walked into the unknown, the human and the two alien sisters were no longer just survivors. They were a family. And somewhere, far away in the burned-out halls of the Black Spire fortress, the legend of the mighty human had already begun to spread.